in your interactions with your employees, or your direct reports, if you've got a 30-minute stand-up, take the first 10 minutes and talk and share and just ask questions. How are you? What's going on? And pay attention if you're on a Zoom call with somebody. If you've got a cat that's making lots of noise, or a dog, or you've got a child doing cartwheels in the background, take some time to talk about that. Find out what's going on in the person's life in that moment.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Hello, and welcome to another episode of 20-Minute Leaders. Meet Rob Volpe, the CEO of Ignite 360. Rob is an astute observer of life and a master storyteller who brings empathy and compassion to the human experience. As CEO of Ignite 360, he leads a team of insights, strategy, and creative professionals serving the world's leading brands across a range of industries. He is the author of Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. As a thought leader in the role of empathy and marketing in the workplace, he's a contributor to Entrepreneurs Leadership Network and frequently speaks on the topic at conferences, corporations, colleges, podcasts, and with the media. He is a graduate of Syracuse University's SI Newhouse School of Public Communications and lives in San Francisco with his husband and 3 cats. Any chance that I get to talk about empathy and talk about how we can be better as humans and better as companies and do better for the world, I'm in. And so I appreciate you taking these 20 minutes to speak with me today, the CEO of and Chief Catalyst Speaker and Empathy Activist of Ignite 360. And I'm excited to hear about this firm and what you're doing, but I'm even more excited to understand the way you think and your internal convictions about the workforce and about empathy and discussions and the books you've written. And so a lot for us to unpack, Rob, and thank you very, very much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do it. Probably a lot to unpack in 20 minutes, but let's dive in.
Well, we'll do our best. And we'll start off simple and hard. Empathy. What brings you to discuss empathy on a daily basis, internally and externally?
Sure. So always been a superpower of mine since the time I was a kid growing up, got teased and bullied, and I found empathy was the thing that I was able to use to navigate through school and survive. So it became a survival technique when I was a child. And then as an adult, there was, I think, the big transition point for me that really led us to where we are today. There was a study that came out of University of Michigan that found they were tracking the empathy ability of college students starting in 1979 all the way through 2009. And they looked at 76 different universities. And they found that at about 2000, 2001, there was a 40% decline in empathy skills, the ability to see the point of view of somebody else compared to college students of those previous decades. And that number never moved back up. So it wasn't a 9/11 induced blip or something from the economy at that moment. It was a crisis situation in my mind. And I remember the study came out in 2010. I was in an airport. It was on CNN. You could see the little ticker scroll going by. And I was like, oh my God, this is huge. Because if you were in college in 2001, that meant by 2010, you were about 30 years old. You were already in the workforce. You were possibly a manager or a leader. And if you didn't have enough empathy, if your empathy muscles weren't strong enough, you weren't going to be contributing and helping in the fullest possible way to your company's success, to the success of people that you're managing, to innovation, all the things that empathy enables. And so, because I worked in marketing research and still do, that's what Ignite 360 does, we study human behavior and we understand how people think and feel. And our job is to build empathetic connections between our clients and their consumers. And oftentimes, with startups, it's the founders often identified a problem, and that might even be a problem that they've had themselves, and they're working to solve that situation. But with a larger corporation, and as companies scale and grow, you bring other people in, they don't have that connection to the original root problem that's what got the company started. So it's really important for clients to be able to dismantle their judgment and to actually connect and understand their consumer. But we were finding there was a lot of barriers getting in the way of empathy, probably because of this empathy crisis that's been going on. And so we set out to understand, like, okay, what do we do? What are the barriers that get in the way? How do people actually overcome that so they can get to a point of empathy? And that's where we developed what we call the 5 steps to empathy, which are those things that in the moment that you're engaging with somebody that you need to do in order to connect with them and have cognitive empathy.
And so if we're looking back for a second to understand your superpower better, you're mentioning the way that this was your survival technique. Now, just to be clear, your empathy was towards the people that were bullying you, the people that were teasing you, your friends.
Yeah, it was, yes, all of the above, but it was really towards the people that were bullying me. I was trying to understand where they were coming from. I couldn't figure out at that point in time why they were treating me that way, but I could hear more about their own lives and try to connect with them and show that I understood them and I understood who they were, so that hopefully if a rumor got started or somebody got agitated, wanted to try to beat me up or something, they'd go, well, no, he's a good guy. Don't, they wouldn't engage or might help dissuade the situation. So it made life a bit easier for me at the time and helped me navigate.
Wow. So if we're looking today at the workforce, and I'm looking at, startups across the board, and you're coming in and saying, you know what, we've been having, these problems that over generations, our levels of empathy have declined. And this is obviously and non-controversially an important skill for us as leaders and as business people and colleagues. What is missing? Why do you think today you were looking at the workforce? Why are we lacking empathy in what we're doing? Why is it?
I mean, so many different factors are going into it. I refer to it as the unintended consequences of good intentions over the years. So societally, if you look at the way, going back into the mid-90s, the way kids were being raised and being overscheduled or being kept really busy, either because it was providing... That's my cat Domino. She has a lot to say about empathy.
I love it. I usually have my dog barking where I wish I had him right here with me.
Yeah, so she my husband now has her entertained. But there's a lot of things that lead into it. So the way kids are being raised, whether they were being overscheduled for childcare reasons or because the parents wanted their kids to have a chance to get into a good college and needed to build the resume. So all of that was taking away from kids' ability to be bored and to go into imaginative play. I mean, right. So when mom used to say, or your dad would say, go in the backyard and play, or go up to your room and find something to do, that typically what would happen, you would get into an imaginative play space, whether you're playing with action figures or dolls, or you're playing superheroes or cops and robbers, whatever you're playing in the backyard. That all requires empathy, and that's building the skill of empathy. So that got diminished. It didn't go away completely, but it got diminished. And then you have the images that we were seeing in the media and the combativeness that was starting to come up, and the winner takes all in social media, or not social media, in reality TV, which again started to really explode around the late 90s, early 2000s. And also in scripted television, and it became about the anti-hero, and it became, so that was contributing to it. You also had then our relationship to technology. Technology is a one-way, you and the device, you and the screen, rather than you and another person having a meaningful conversation. And then there's social media, and I'm not going to go too far into that. Most people are aware of social media's ability to really, social media is about validating and self-worth and making us feel better about ourselves rather than about how we connect with other people. Globalization has come into play. People are suddenly faced with people that are other that we hadn't before. And then in the workplace, we have decades upon decades of a patriarchal non-emotional management processes that have been taught through business schools and just through learning and being passed down from, manager to employee, on and on and on. And it's said that there's no room for empathy in the workplace. And it's really just been with the pandemic, one of the positives of the pandemic. Suddenly people are like, no, wait a minute, I want something different. And I need something different.
So going based off of that, we're looking at a business. At the end, I'm looking at, people running startups. There are so many different issues with running a startup and so many different complexities. I want to understand why should one of their focuses be on empathy? Why should my friend who's running a company and is focused on hiring and firing and selling to new customers and developing, etc., why should he or she bring empathy to one of the top things that they should be concerned with in their day-to-day of the company culture?
Great question. A lot of leaders are asking that, whether they're at startups or at larger, Fortune 100 companies. And the reasons, there's a lot of data that's out there. The studies over the last year have found, 90% of Gen Z are more likely to stay at a company where they have empathetic leadership. There's also data that 3/4 of employees feel engaged in their jobs when they've got highly empathetic managers. 86% of employees are able to manage demands of work and personal life when they've got an empathetic leader. 61% of employees are able to be innovative at work when they have an empathetic leader, compared to only 13% if they don't have an empathetic leader. So, and those are just a few data points from some of the different studies that have been coming out in the last year. There's a lot of benefit to being empathetic. And we're not talking about emotional empathy. I'm talking about cognitive empathy. And there's a lot of misconceptions and fear around empathy that people have. And so what I try to myth bust in my book and then in conversations like this is, hey, there's cognitive empathy, which is the perspective taking. And then there's emotional empathy. And the emotional empathy is the feelings of somebody else. I don't ask people to get to a place of emotional empathy. There's a lot of things that I think get in people's way. And it's also reserved for the people that are closest to you. But cognitive empathy, seeing somebody else's perspective, that's what we use in our day-to-day. That's what we use in business. If you're sitting at the negotiating table, wouldn't you benefit from understanding what the person sitting across the table from you it needs or wants, so that you can either use that in your negotiation and your persuasion, or understand what you might have to do to get to that halfway point or get to that place of agreement to close your deal. Fascinating.
I love the distinction between the emotional empathy and the cognitive empathy. And I think that sometimes we aim to, obviously I think every person wants to have more empathy, but sometimes it feels so distant and so complicated, and say, okay, but I'm not emotionally attached here, so what's wrong, and why can't I but understanding that there's different levels and that you're able to still have this cognitive empathy and be able to listen and understand the other's opinion, you can still get 80% of the value and the way that you interact with them there. So more tangibly now, Rob, if we're looking at companies, organizations, teams, how can we actually make it better? What are some actual things that we can do to be better leaders, be better colleagues, have more empathy in the workforce?
Yeah, I think about it from the perspective of, as a leader or a founder or an investor, you're always like, keep the foot on the gas, go, 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 go. And you don't take your foot off the gas, but you might sort of adjust your carburetor and the mix that is going in of how much fuel and oxygen are coming into the catalytic converter, which someday that's going to be a really ancient analogy that I'm not going to be able to use. But as we move towards battery operated and solar and things, however, for now it still works. It's taking some time. One of the simplest things that I counsel people to do is in your interactions with your employees or your direct reports. If you've got a 30-minute stand-up, take the first 10 minutes and talk and share and just ask questions. How are you? what's going on, and pay attention. If you're on a Zoom call with somebody, if you've got a cat that's making lots of noise, or a dog, or you've got a child doing cartwheels in the background, take some time to talk about that. Find out what's going on in the person's life in that moment. That's all showing empathy, and be able to say back to them, I can imagine how you feel, or I can see your point of view. I can see where that would be difficult, to be trying to do a podcast and have a cat meowing, right at your foot, wanting your attention away from the other thing that you're trying to do. That creates an empathetic moment. And that makes me, that if I'm on the receiving side of that, like when that event happened and you said, oh yeah, I've got a dog, and if my dog were here, I'd be doing this. That made you had empathy with me. You understood what I was going through, which made me feel safer and like, okay, I'm not going to freak out about that. It's all right. Let's go ahead and move through. And it's doing things like that with your employees, with everybody in your organization. It's leaders finding a place of vulnerability and being comfortable sharing some of their own perspective and feelings beyond the corporate script that we felt like we've had to follow for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Be a little more honest, be a little more human. Talk about how, the last 2 years have been affecting you. And on a personal level, I mean, there's obviously all the company things that people are seeing, but then how are you dealing with that? And people, you'd be surprised. People want to support their leader. If they're really bought into the organization, they might give you empathy back in return. And that actually feels really good.
I love that. Rob, how, I understand, the way your journey and your personal conviction, and, a lot of people care a lot about empathy and care a lot about how do we make things better in this regard, but you're really dedicating your career to this. Well, how does that work in your day to day? How do you actually make a career with helping people be more empathetic?
Well, I've created an organization that, specializes in helping people empathetically understand human behavior, understand their customers. And we have, as we developed the 5 steps, we recognized that there was an opportunity for us to put it into everything that we do. So we've developed training programs around empathy. We bring it into, before we go out into the field on any research project, we talk about the 5 steps and help our clients have awareness of it. And just that little act, spending 5 minutes talking about empathy, I've had brand managers, marketers come out of a research session and say to me, wow, I was really having trouble hearing what that person was saying until I realized that I had judgment and I needed to dismantle my judgment. And when I did, it opened up all these new insights that I hadn't been listening to. And when you hear those success stories, when we're able to actually make that connection, when we're able to use our storytelling abilities to really bridge that gap, whether it's at the C-suite or at the factory floor, making people realize this is why I'm doing this. This is who I'm making these products for. That's a gift back for us. And I think just inspires us to do even better. And I personally, I think there's an opportunity for us to make the world a better place and leave a better world than what we've found and are living through. And if empathy is my way of doing that, I'm all for it.
I love how much I believe you. It's I can feel it in your voice, I can feel it in your tone, and I can feel it in the personal journey that you shared with me. And I really appreciate it, Rob. And it leaves me with a little bit more inspiration. That the way that I'm going to be interacting, not just with my teammates, employees, leaders, etc., but also with people in general, and be more empathetic. And it sounds like it'll also besides making me a better person for them, it'll also make me a better person for me. And so I'm going to take that with me. And Rob, thank you very, very much. I appreciate your time and your energy. And stay safe.
Thank you,
healthy.
Michael. I appreciate the time.